something beside me, a light to the kerosene, and the places aren't real anymore, and the faces don't say anything, in the silent light of the mind-blown sphere. It's a game, Devil's Chess Club. Devil's Chess Club.
Welcome to the Devil's Chess Club. I'm Aaron Good. Today, Bryce, Greene, and I are going to be looking at a number of momentous recent events. This episode title is On the Brink, and I think that this pretty much captures it. Like every other conscious and independent political thinker, I'm watching everything unfold and hoping that somehow the U.S. empire can accept that the age of U.S. global dominion is over. There's not going to be a new American century, and efforts to keep that neoconservative pipe dream alive are, in all likelihood, only going to make things worse for the West in the long run. And that's if our rulers don't kill us all by bringing on nuclear doomsday. Devil's Chess Club is part of the American Exception podcast. I did not particularly want to be a YouTuber initially, but this began when David Talbot approached me about wanting to do a show together. I think the world of David and was happy to do this. Up to now, Devil's Chess Club was sponsored by the documentary film series Four Died Trying. Recently, Four Died Trying has had to shut down its Patreon site due to legal issues. Presently, we're considering a new Four Died Trying podcast, really dedicated to the film series, like more specifically, but we have to see how that's going to come together. I'm not sure of the long-term future of Devil's Chess Club. We don't know if David Talbot can recover enough to rejoin us. We don't know if it will be worthwhile to keep the show running or to simply switch back to audio podcasts for subscribers. We have seen our views climbing steadily, but that said, I have deep misgivings about this platform, to put it mildly. I'm talking about YouTube. They seem to demonetize partially or fully most of our videos. I appeal to them, and sometimes they reverse that at least partially, but that takes time, and typically the video is out for a while before they admit that there was no reason for their arbitrarily established demonetization in the first place. This is all very tedious to try to explain, and the upshot is that we're going to try and post shorter episodes here with the full episodes available to Patreon subscribers. So if you want to see the rest of this episode, and you'll also have access to, in my biased opinion, the best podcast collection of deep political and historical analysis, please subscribe to the American Exception podcast on Patreon. The URL is patreon.com/American Exception. It is also in the show notes. If you can afford it, please subscribe. The more subscribers we have, the more that we can do. Among other things, we're trying to make a documentary film on Peter Dale Scott, his biography, his political, historical scholarship, and his amazing poetry. But we need help to do this. So please subscribe to the American Exception podcast on Patreon. Bryce, Greene, it's great to be back with you as all these crazy things are happening in the world. How you doing out there?
It's good to be back here. I wish there weren't so much historical content being generated right now, but we're living in the craziest time in my lifetime, but I guess everyone says that all the time.
It always feels maybe that every era is important, but I think this one especially so. But zooming in a little bit to your position there in Bloomington, how is the encampment going?
So this is day 99 of the Solidarity encampment at IU. However, it is likely to be the last, if not second to last day of the encampment. The university has, they put forth a bunch of new draconian policies that were ratified by the Board of Trustees just 2 days ago. We tried to fight against it. We organized against it. But they have their marching orders. And so we're pivoting to new techniques of organized resistance against the university's support for genocide. And some people are sad to see the camp go, but I think it opens us up to a lot of new possibilities. And it's not like we're giving up or anything. It's not like we're stopping. In fact, we're probably in a better position than we would have been had the camp not come down. If the camp was still going, then we'd have to spend time doing camp stuff. But now we have not only a wide base of support, but also more time and energy to put towards something that'll really screw with them.
Yes. Well, I hope that it is going to help you to be able to organize and be freed up in different ways rather than dealing with the, what seemed from you to be sometimes circus-like atmosphere down there. And it did take a lot of time. And if you don't really have any choice but to disband it, then that is that. So I hope that it goes well for you down there. And more importantly, I mean, bigger issues are overtaking everyone. It seems that the protests and all of these things are of less importance than these other big factors facing the U.S. regime right now. I want to talk about some of the crazy things that have been happening of late. I was on vacation. That's why last episode of Devil's Chess Club was an interview I recorded a little while ago with Charlotte Dennett on pipelines. So there's a few things we haven't discussed that much. Biden dropping out is a crazy development, and we've had some
ancient
time.
History by now.
It is. You're right.
So much stuff has happened over the last 3 to 4 weeks.
Right.
You know what they say?
Have you heard much from him lately? Have you heard anything from Biden lately?
There was some recent interview where he just said like the stupidest thing in the world. Like, it was like, why didn't Trump get the hostages back?
Yeah.
Like from Israel. Like his brain is still scrambled egg. So
right. I mean, there was already a sense that what the U.S. was doing in places like with NATO expansion and with keeping these soldiers in Syria and with backing the Gaza Genocide, that this was really the deep state on autopilot, and the fact that Joe Biden was this doddering senile person, only strengthened that assessment. And now it's like, okay, who really is running? Joe Biden seems to have he's not very visible, and he seemed incompetent anyway. And all of these extremely important things are happening for the fate of the world. And it really is, you get the sense that the deep state is running things. What do you think of, which I'll talk about a little bit more in a second, but what do you think of Kamala's chances? I mean, she seems to be doing a little bit better in the polls, but that seems to be based on probably quite superficial things like her not being Biden, for example.
Yeah, well, I think that's the core of it. I mean, she's obviously got the credentials of being a black woman, which is why she is the vice president. Like, bear in mind that Biden said, "I'm going to pick a black woman," and then basically just like spun a wheel and it landed on Kamala Harris. It could have been Stacey Abrams, could have been someone else. But she's not there because she's capable of running the country, or that she's capable of making the country better or improving people's lives in any way. She's there because she's compliant, and she checked boxes that people in that side of politics wanted to check. Whether or not it means that she's gonna be popular enough to win is an open question. I tend to think that since she doesn't seem to have that presidential charisma, and here I'm putting on my pundit hat. She doesn't. She has a history of being very off-putting in public settings, but a lot of that you can airbrush over through the magic of public relations. I mean, they airbrushed over so much of Biden's insanity. I don't see how they wouldn't be able to do the same for Kamala. The question is whether or not people are going to fall for it. And it's not just like falling for, like we're saying that her record is, more good or more progressive than it actually is. It's more of, hey, I'm running on more Joe Biden, more Democrat policy, more, more liberalism, more American liberalism. And I don't think people want that. People saw their lives get steadily worse and worse and worse. And I don't think that the new face to the same party is going to change people who are considering voting for Trump. And it's also the case that they don't have a vision for the future that they're trying to push on people. They're saying, oh, Trump's bad. We have to protect democracy. Now they pivoted to saying, this is actually one of the funnier things. After Trump's assassination attempt, they can no longer say that it's a threat to democracy. Because if it was a threat to democracy, then you shouldn't have been mad at people for saying, I wish he had died. But since they all had to moralize, they can no longer say that he's the next Hitler that's coming. They have to say that he's weird, which is true. But I don't know if that's going to be enough to convince people that major change isn't needed in this country.
I mean, Joe Biden said his whole thing was nothing will fundamentally change. But it turns out he was even lying about that, which is the funny thing, because he's presiding over the destruction of the U.S. empire. That's where these people, I think the collective establishment or deep state, or whatever we call it, is so blinkered in their thinking and ultimately stupid. It really is just a case study in the dialectic of history and dynastic decline as the dynastic cycle really of China can be applied to most any political order, that you attain so much power and wealth and it corrupts inevitably. And that it's an oligarchy emerges and becomes more and more parasitic and rent-seeking and corrupts all of society. And that's what the world has been saddled with as the U.S. has degenerated, into even something more monstrous than it was before. It was never really a full democracy, obviously, but the decision to go for global empire just gave them too much. They acquired too much power. And decade after decade, oligarchic power eroded what democracy there was in this country. And now we've got this bizarre spectacle. Another part of it, so we'll talk about what it was that brought Biden down, but I just want to add another aspect of this sort of top-down quality and mysterious quality of politics, because we don't know precisely who decided that Biden needed to go and who was ultimately decisive about that. We also don't know what really happened with the Trump shooting. And was this person a lone nut? Was the shooting able to happen because of incompetence, or was he assisted by people? And if he was assisted by people, was this for him to act as a patsy, and were there other shooters potentially? I don't know. How much have you been following the forensic details of this?
Not much at all, honestly. I probably don't know too much more than what I talked about on the last episode. Yeah, right. And just because, hectic week. But it's still, I mean, there's so many questions about, okay, well, why did the Secret Service fail so hard? That's the really main question. And I think if you look hard into the Secret Service's history, you start to realize that they're not really a trustworthy agency. And they're definitely part of the highest levels of the deep state, such as it is. I mean, right now it's looped into the Department of Homeland Security. But
is it now? Is that who handles the Secret Service now? It's not the Treasury anymore?
Yeah, it used to be Treasury, but then I think in 2004 or 2005 they transferred it over to the DHS.
That doesn't give me any more confidence at all. That's kind
of it was part of the.
It used to be a part of the financial oligarchy. Now it's more squarely the national security state that serves the financial oligarchy. So right. I don't know. It just seems like a strange way to do it. But I mean, it's logical. It makes more sense than it being Treasury. Although it being Treasury actually was a humorous commentary on America, because it really shows that money is king in this country and money is the real sovereign. And that's why the money people are charged with protecting or not protecting the president.
Yeah. I mean, it's really, we talk about or I guess you talk about it in your book, the Trumanite Network.
That's Michael Glennon's term for it.
Yeah, Glennon and double government. Yeah, but the Trumanite Network, which was the network that was created after the National Security Act in 1947.
47. Yeah.
47. Yeah, and that created the DOD, all these departments. You get the CIA and all, but
Joint Chiefs, National Security Council.
But then later on, you get an augmentation to that. That I've been in my mind calling the Bushite network. I mean, it's probably better to call it the Cheneyite network. Oh, but it's
I think the Bush one is different than the Cheney one, though. The Bush one is the more like the octopus kind of old boy CIA. The Cheney one.
I'm talking about Bush 2.
You
like
mean H.W. Bush or W. Bush?
W. Bush. I'm talking about the apparatus that
there
was constructed in the wake of 9/11.
Yeah.
And like that includes like the Homeland Security, and it includes all the secret COG stuff that we don't know about.
Gotcha. Yeah, I get what you're saying. Yeah,
Like
the post 9/11 thing was like the Patriot Act and everything else is almost like a second and more fascistic National Security Act of 1947. Absolutely.
Right. Oh, there's a good paper to be written about that. Honestly, maybe it already exists, but nevertheless,
there's the book by Dana Priest and Alan Arkin, maybe the Washington Post writers, on the sprawling national security state. They did this partly with the Washington Post. Maybe they wrote a book on it too. But so there is some work on the crazy levels of bureaucracy and secrecy that were added after 9/11, and it's pretty horrifying.
Yeah, and it seems that that if that network is at the core of so much of the Secret Service, well, then that puts that network in question. But again, since I don't know much of the details of this, it's hard to talk about it in anything other than a high level. You know, we can speculate about what people would wanted, which factions would be in operation, but we simply don't know enough. We can look back at the JFK assassination and say, okay, well, this guy's connected to this guy who owned this building, who did this, who was part of this company. And we could see broadly the faction that coalesced to support the removal of President Kennedy. In this case, it's a lot less clear to me, mostly because, it's harder to track the machinations of the elite as they're happening.
And everything is so in flux right now. It's really difficult to understand what they think they're doing.
Yeah, but I mean, it's very clear that there's a faction within the American, ruling elite that very much doesn't want Trump. That sees Trump as a danger to things like NATO and the America's project for global primacy. But there's another part that sees Trump as a benefit to that, because Trump can be controlled in ways that, he can tear apart the Iran deal, and he can, bomb Qasem Soleimani, and he can do all this crazy stuff. While mobilizing the far right inside the country. So there are always multiple factions inside of the American state that are competing. But who precisely these people are, you could take the Ferguson approach and try and look at donors. But even that only gets you so far.
Well, I will talk a little bit about the deep state here for people that haven't spent much time looking at my academic work, and try to explain why the deep state, how we can think of the deep state in terms of the removal of Biden and the attempted assassination of Donald Trump, which may or may not have been an elite, a plot of elites. So in American Exception, Empire, and the Deep State, I define the deep state in the most basic sense as the institutions that exercise undemocratic power over state and society. Okay, that's the broadest version. Pluralistic to varying degrees, it's an outgrowth of the overworld of private wealth and includes the institutions that advance oligarchic or overworld interests through nexuses connecting the overworld of private wealth, the underworld of organized crime, and national security organizations that mediate in between them. So there's really two levels of deep state here, and I don't mind being less precise about it because it's a symptom of our own political situation that we do not understand the regime that governs us, that the apex of power is obscured from us, and that they're able to operate lawlessly when they want to and in secrecy. So they can do things like remove John Kennedy and keep anyone from authoritatively and definitively investigating the event for 60 plus years, for example. And if they have the power to kill with impunity anyone up to and including the President of the United States, then we do not really live in a democratic system. And I think it's for that reason, since the democracy aspect is the key legitimizing myth of America's global empire and supposedly benevolent hegemony, they can't admit that they have an exceptionalist regime that pretty much corresponds to the Führer principle in practice when it comes to what the state can and cannot do. That's just pretty scary. The other way to think of the deep state is all of the institutions that do contribute to top-down governance. So by that reckoning, you have to think of the power of oligarchic wealth over universities, over media organizations. So here's the generic I made a diagram to illustrate the tripartite, what I called the tripartite state, which is America's supposed to be a democracy, Congress, the president, all of that, the stuff that's visible, the stuff they teach you in school, that's the public state. But then after World War II, because they had to protect freedom and so on, you have the National Security Act and fight communism. You had the creation of the Pentagon and this huge national security state, including the CIA, who deceptively gave itself the power to execute covert operations with plausible deniability, which means they can break laws and then lie about having done it, which means they essentially have a license, a sanction to conspire constantly, and that's what they do. And then the third part of it is really the key part, which I represent here with Wall Street, which is oligarchic power, corporate wealth in the United States, and how this is something outside of the formal, it's a political power in a way that we're governed outside of just the public state and the national security state. And it operates by campaign contributions, subsidizing think tanks, controlling universities, manipulating social science, controlling journalism and the media, controlling tech platforms, everything that's owned and or run by wealthy corporations or corporate wealth or foundations that are established by corporate oligarchs that can fund things like people's university dissertations or books or think tanks and things like that, right? All of these instruments. And then when you stop and think about it, what sort of institutional or organizational wherewithal is there that's really anti-oligarchy and pro-democracy in terms of economics and other things? And there's really not. Okay, that other more expansive version of the deep state is really something you could call the regime. Okay, and that's this diagram here. It represents civil society added to that. So that's like what I say in the book is deep political power neutralizes the ability of civil society institutions to act as a check against top-down anti-democratic forces. So civil society is co-opted and manipulated by these same oligarchic forces that lobbied to get the CIA created and that benefit when we overthrow some government halfway across the world so that these corporate oligarchs can steal the resources of that country and make a lot of money off of them. This is really an oligarchic system. And if you want to think about how it plays out today with Joe Biden, it doesn't seem that he was removed by any sort of CIA bureaucrat or anything like that. It seemed like it was Obama and other people with lots of money and power in the party saying, like, we have no chance with Biden and he needs to drop to have any chance at all. That's the way it seems to me. So is that the deep state? Well, it wasn't this. It doesn't seem to have been a CIA operation or something carried out by the clandestine state. It seems to have been the deep state when the deep state refers to the oligarchy and the overall regime that we live in that controls not just the state, but all of those institutions that determine who will be able to control the state. He wasn't notably removed in a democratic way because essentially those oligarchic deep state forces decided that there would be no primary, really, that would be serious, and that Biden was to be anointed as the candidate, even though he was very unpopular, and this was very predictable. And we predicted, you and I both said that we didn't, I believe, that I know I did, and I'm pretty sure you did too, that Biden wasn't going to be the nominee, and they were going to get rid of him.
I thought he was going to die.
We might die,
I still think he's going to die.
That may well be true. So this is really what we're... Now, you talk about the Trump case, however, the assassination attempt on Trump, that was either it was some crazy screwball, or it was acting alone, or it was perhaps the clandestine state. And that really would be the deep state in the conventional sense of like the sort of dark top-down power that controls the organs of the U.S. government, has sort of a secret, illegitimate veto power over democratic politics, and controls the national security organs and the public state as well through money and just through the ability to put people in the right positions of power to carry out their dictates. Now, we also could look at the deep state in the bigger regime sense and think about the Israel situation. Okay, civil society institutions are unable to act as a check against top-down anti-democratic forces. Well, think about how 80% of the public or 60 plus percent pretty early on was saying Israel needs to stop the war. They need a ceasefire, and then we need a peaceful resolution to that. Doesn't matter, because how can you get politicians to respond just to the majority of the public? What happens when university people speak out about it? Well, oligarchic power intervenes, and then all these people in the positions of power get calls from donors and everything else saying, hey, you need to crack down on these protesters, right? You have people in media organizations resigning because of that sort of coverage. You have Facebook censorship, Google censorship of discussions of Israel-Palestine and the Gaza genocide. This is the deep state. So ironically, this will come out on a platform that is essentially part of the deep state, broadly conceived as the regime. Google is functionally a part of the regime, part of our system of top-down governance in a supposed democracy. And so this is why the deep state concept is very much important right now as we look around and think all of these crazy and terrible things are happening and our government is behaving terribly. And we're pretty sure that it's not merely a function of Joe Biden and or Kamala Harris.
No, totally correct. I mean, your analysis of the tripartite conception of the state is very useful in, just understanding these different trends and forces within the American regime. And, you have this top-down force that's trying to circumvent any popular pressure that can be enacted on the public state, and sometimes just circumventing the public state altogether in order to change the nature of the society. And in this case of Biden, I mean, I think I mentioned this last week, but Sam Husseini has done some good work looking at the ways in which the Democratic Party establishment may have been manipulating this behind the scenes. He notes that the only thing that happened to change who the nominee was that the Democrats, they said there will be no primary process and, there will be no debates. We're not challenging Joe Biden. And then afterwards, they said, well, we had a fair primary process. This is who the people chose. And then they said, oh, well, maybe they chose the wrong guy. So, but luckily, the people also chose Kamala Harris, who also no one voted for. But then, she was able to slide into the candidacy and perhaps the presidency without any public debate, without any primary season where people are encouraged to challenge her and where her record's under scrutiny, and where she might be put up against people who are more charismatic or more progressive or more popular in other ways. They were able to sidestep that. And then they were able to say that they moved the time of the Democratic National Convention to weeks after the Republican National Convention, which is unprecedented. Every year since these conventions started happening, they have been within a week of each other. Either the RNC goes first or the DNC goes first. In this case, the DNC was a whole 4 weeks after that. And in between that, for some reason, you had you had presidential debates before the nominees were officially selected, which is, again, unprecedented, unless you assume that this process of democracy is really a joke that's to be overcome and circumvented and maneuvered around. And so you have this confluence of events that were engineered by the Democratic Party elites to make it so that there was no primary process. And then after this debate, you had these same elites start leaking things to the press about, well, what are we going to do? Who's going to replace Joe Biden? Can we even replace Joe Biden? Should we even do that? And then within a week or two of that, and then you had Kamala Harris making 48 hours of phone calls. She's in. So if you're a Democratic Party operative and you're like, well, we know Joe Biden is toast, but we also know that the public doesn't like oligarchy. So how do we circumvent them in this case? Well, then doing exactly what they did would be the best way to go. And now they seem to have gotten Kamala Harris, who is a total oligarch supporter. I mean, just look at her work after the financial crisis. She actually helped Trump's Treasury Secretary, Steve Mnuchin, get a sweetheart deal from the government, despite all the criminality that he and his banks were involved in during that crisis. Kamala just let him off scot-free. So that's one way in which the establishment can be certain that she can be trusted to carry out her interests. And this is to say nothing of her work, in other parapolitical cases. I mean, the
RFK.
cases. Yeah, Sirhan. Kamala Harris was Attorney General while the Sirhan case was up for review, and she dismissed it. despite all evidence pointing to the fact
it was
that
absurd. The person that they relied upon was this UK just hack. He's like a UK version of Gerald Posner, and he has this absurd theory about like trying to explain away the discrepancies in that case. But it's
does he have a magic bullet theory? I actually didn't.
Well, you have to have you have to have some very bizarre magic bullet theories to try to put those bullets in to have all the holes accounted for.
Literally go back around.
No, the bullet that can hit someone from behind going upwards sharply, even though the person's in front, like 3 feet. I mean, it was absurd, but the point was they just didn't. She knew that the powers that be did not want Sirhan paroled, and so she didn't do it. I feel that also her,
or maybe she didn't know, and like she just didn't care. But in either case, the result is the same. That she's good.
She's supposed to evaluate arguments, like, and that there's the evidence is there. That's her. She's charged with that. She doesn't get
she's a lawyer,
right? I mean, that's what she's supposed to be. Now, the other thing that I think is, I don't really care personally about who politicians or other people sleep with. It's kind of their own business, and they need to work out their own marriages, how and how things, whatever, right? But like her beginning into politics, as I heard someone say that she began her political career on her back, referring to her being the mistress of Willie Brown, who was infamous for. Yeah, he was. My understanding is that she was given a position by Willie Brown, and she was his mistress, and that this is common knowledge in political circles. And if David, when David does return, David Talbot, we will ask him about this because he may know more about it. He's not a fan of Kamala for a number of reasons, but I felt like, okay, you just shouldn't necessarily worry about those things, but I think it's not going to help her politically. It just makes her seem like a very crass opportunist. And, whether it's fair to say she began it on her back, we don't really know what sexual positions they prefer. So that might be putting too fine a point on it. But I don't think that it's going to help her when people understand her biography more. It's funny that that the right is trying to depict her as this super progressive, ultra liberal person, which is like a nonsensical thing when you understand what liberalism is, which is not a left-wing thing, so it's like the right can caricature her that way, but I don't think that if you are all very far on the left, you can have much to do with her anyway. I don't believe anything she says about Gaza or having sympathy for the Palestinians. I think she's nothing but a cipher for power. It's like, so this is, I have no idea, but the bigger thing is, we'll move on to talking about some other more pressing issues. We are at the stage now where it's more symbolic or almost tabloidy to follow U.S. elections, because the real events that are political are beyond the control of the forces that can stage manage our ridiculous political system. That is that the U.S. empire is unraveling, and I want to talk about a few things related to that.
Before we move on, I just want to point out that, again, that's how I view politics. It's tabloidy, or American day-to-day horse race politics. It's tabloidy, and a lot of it's fake and doesn't matter. If you're a rational person, you should know who you're voting for. If you don't know their names, then you can look them up within a few minutes and be like, okay, this guy's this guy, that guy's that guy. Okay, there. And I'll get hate for this, but like, if you're in a swing state and it matters, you should probably vote for Kamala Harris. Like, that will be better for America, and that's pretty easy case to make. But it doesn't matter that much, because both of them in 20 years, both of them are going to put us on the same path towards, destruction, poverty, and obliteration. But with Kamala, I think...
Go ahead.
Well, with Kamala, I think it's pretty clear that if you pay attention to like wonky government stuff, FTC appointments, or the labor board appointments, or who's going to be in the office of management and budget, those are appointments that matter. And if you have Kamala in office, if you have a Democrat in office, well, then you're very obviously going to get a lot better people in those positions. And that has, not a small effect on people's lives. I mean, but I'm not stumping for the Democrats, because the fact that they're able to give these peanuts doesn't detract from the fact that they're genocidal freaks and they are aiming to blow up the world. It seems very clear to me that Trump is worse than Kamala, but that's a moot point, because what people need to be focusing on is the real politics, which is, okay, well, I'm an average person. How can I impact politics? I can vote once every 2 years, or I could do something else. I can organize. I can be a part of an organization that's doing something. I can put my money and my institutional weight and my energy behind an organization that might be able to help. Oh, geez.
I think that I can't even deign to tell anyone how to vote or who to vote, depending on where they live or not, because I'm not sure that I think that you can make an argument for Kamala if you live in a swing state. You can make an argument for Stein any place if you wanted to. You can make an argument. I mean, you could make an argument for Trump that because he's so crass, he's going to bring it into the American empire quicker because we will lose legitimacy around the world, and it will hasten the evaporation of the unipolar empire and thereby be of greater benefit to a greater amount of people in the world. But I'm not even really wanting to make that argument either. I feel that all these things are going to be overtaken by events. And when you're saying that, here's where I do disagree with you a little bit, in that in 20 years, I don't think that it will be the case that these leaders are plotting how to rule the world in the same way, because I think that that's what we're seeing the end of. And the establishment hasn't really woken up to that fact because they can't envision a post-imperial world. There's no faction of the oligarchy that is like saying, let's follow international law and let's try to solve social problems in the United States, and that will be the way to benefit our nation and the world. Thanks to Dana Chavarria for producing this episode, and thank you for tuning in. You can watch the rest of this episode by subscribing to the American Exception podcast on Patreon. There you will find the best coverage and analysis of the deep politics of the U.S. empire. The URL is patreon.com/American Exception. It's also in the show notes. If you can afford it, please subscribe. Like many of you out there, I'm a bit overwhelmed by what is happening in the world today. I just got back from a vacation at the beach, if we can call those Jersey Shore, sandy coastline things beaches. But at one point, this was on the most beautiful day of the trip, I saw a fighter jet fly by, and I couldn't help but imagine mushroom clouds suddenly appearing in the distance. This banal terror is hanging over humanity right now. All of humanity. Somehow, humanity must find a way to see to it that the U.S. empire is checkmated on the devil's chessboard in a way that doesn't spark nuclear doomsday.